Hello, folks. Welcome back to World War II TV in what is going to be rather a lightweight week because I've got other things to do. I was out doing a film job on Omaha Beach today. Anyway, another cracking family show is lined up for us. Stuart Green joins us to share his father's extraordinary story, a navigator in that tricky mid-war period when air superiority was still a dream. Wellingtons, Stirlings, and a dramatic story on the ground. What's not to like, eh? I'll bring him in now. Good evening, Stuart. How are you today?
Yeah, fine, Paul. Thanks very much for having me on the show. It's great to have the opportunity to share my dad's story. One of thousands of such stories, but sadly, you know, there's still many not been told. So hopefully this might encourage people to research their own family story if they haven't done it as yet.
Absolutely. And it seems to have been a long time coming because we've kind of known each other and exchanged messages back and forth for I think it's years on Facebook and email now. But anyway, you're finally here now. So, folks, I'm going to bring up Stuart's PowerPoint there. I think a lot of your questions, folks, will be answered as the presentation goes on. But if you have anything you want clarification on, please, of course, do jump in and we'll do that. But it's going to be a good one. So over to you, Stuart.
Yeah, hi, everybody. Good evening. Obviously, the story of my dad, Flight Lieutenant Alan Green. He born in Coventry, 15th of June 1920, and sadly he actually died on his birthday 50 years ago this year, although the date on his death certificate is the 16th of June, but he actually died in the evening of his birthday, so 50 years ago this year. He was educated at Bablake School in Cov. He then was following in family footsteps. We had a family business, a small chain of pharmacies in Coventry, founded by my grandfather, who was as you'll see, was a prolific photographer and cinematographer. We had a camera shop in one of our pharmacies, so my grandfather had access to all the cutting edge photographic equipment. Anyway, my dad sort of followed my father's footsteps, started training at the Leicester School of Pharmacy, and then war intervened, and he was called up eventually in 1940. He had two siblings. He was the oldest of three, a younger brother who served in the Chindits and survived the war, and a younger sister who stayed at home but was in the nursing auxiliary force. I've got talking about my grandfather's cinematography prowess. I've got a clip which Paul can show, I think, of my dad in my grandparents' garden back in Coventry. We're thinking about 1941. So if Paul can just share that.
I'll bring that up now. Here we go.
Yeah, quite incredible. That's my grandmother on the left, but my dad there, because he was an early navigator. They called them observers and air gunners at that time, so hence the observer brevet rather than the navigator, which came later on. So yeah, priceless footage. Thanks, Paul.
Yeah.
Just pre-war, some family photographs. My dad and his two siblings out on some sort of trolley thing. My dad and his brother. My dad and my uncle both in the school rugby team at Coventry at Bablake School in 1936-37. My dad's at the back, second in from the right. My uncle on the far left in the middle, and that is the bottom. There is our flagship pharmacy, the bottom of Hertford Street in Coventry, and that was where our camera shop was, in the basement, and it was the first camera shop in Coventry apparently. That shop, actually, the windows were bombed out, and as you'll see later on, we did suffer quite badly as a business when Coventry was bombed. Obviously, war breaks out, and he's signed. He's in the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve, and so he didn't actually join up until September 1940, and he went to Cardington near Bedford, where the big hangars are that house the ill-fated Airlander. So that there was a selection and training centre there. So he was selected as navigator. I think he wanted to be a pilot, but he was colourblind, so ended up being a nav. I believe he was very good at maths as well, which probably swung it in favour of being a nav rather than a pilot. So that's a picture of my dad there as well. And this on the left is a poster of the era, join up to be an airman. He went, having done his bit at Cardington, he was then sent down to do basic RAF training in Torquay. And he was, well, first of all, before he did that, I just thought I just added these today actually, but a picture of my uncle, and he's chinned it. So I found this picture of my uncle having a bath in the field out in Burma, which was great. And then my auntie there in the middle of the three, and then also on her own there. So I just thought I'd better incorporate them. Anyway, my dad was at the Turak Hotel in Torquay, which is still there. And I only visited it for the first time 2 or 3 years ago, and they were quite intrigued. And this was 5 initial training wing, December 1940. And I managed to find where this photograph was taken. Anyway, whilst my dad was there, of course, 14th of November 1940, he hears news of his home city being dreadfully bombed in what was the worst single bombing raid on the UK in World War II, I believe. As I mentioned, that shop that I showed you had all its windows blown out. My dad's favourite shop in Earl Street was completely destroyed, and our warehouse was very badly damaged as well. My dad, on hearing the news, he wrote this incredible letter, which I'll read some of it. But bearing in mind he was only 20 at this time, he heard the news, and he'd just come off sort of guard duty where he'd been up all night in driving rain, and he said he'd obviously received a letter confirming that my grandparents were alive. But it's incredibly emotive and mature beyond his years, really. As I say, he was 20. It was a great relief to know that we were all alive anyway, even if other things have gone. Very few people will have anything left after this war, and if we manage to get away with our lives, we can consider ourselves lucky anyway. On Friday night, I heard that 1,000 people have been killed in Coventry, and naturally disputed them, thinking it was absolutely impossible there could be such a death toll. This is quite funny, I think, when you think about our modern means of communication now. On Sunday morning, I spent 2 hours in a telephone box and got Coventry, but couldn't get in touch with you or Griffiths or anyone. Then I spent another 2 more hours on Sunday, and then still couldn't get that through. And then in desperation, he called the police station. They wanted to know why I was calling, which is quite a very British response. Yeah. And then he then got through to somebody, Mr. Grant, who said that there were no greens on the casualty list, but only 60% had been identified by then. Anyway, he then goes on, and it's really turning the parent-child thing on its head, because he's really, really reassuring my grandfather, and tells him, not to worry himself to death about it. And he says, if you are short of ready cash, sell my motorbike if it is still whole. and then he goes on to say, we spend several hours hand drilling when they make you sweat like bulls, and then you spend the rest of the day in wet clothes. It's marvelous, but it hardens you up for the time you meet Jerry. And I'm not at all sorry that I joined up, and because in the not too distant future I'll be able to get my own back on the Rotten Devils. Interestingly, there's a bit of humour later on in the letter where he goes on to say, I'm even going to spot some pharmacy shops over Germany to target pharmacy shops. So anyway,
it's interesting, Stuart, just hearing someone on service worried about their civilian relatives, because we kind of think of it the other way around. We think of the guy in the service being the one the people back home are worried about. Oh, what's happening to Uncle Fred over in North Africa? But in this case, it's he's the one worried about his family back in Coventry.
You just can't imagine what it must have been like, and hearing this news and not really having any means of communication. I think he managed to get some leave as well, and did go back to the city not long afterwards. So he certainly had motivation to get through his training. So then on completion of his time in Devon, he headed off to Canada as part of the of the Commonwealth Training Plan, and thousands of Air Force were trained at various locations, but majority of them in Canada. And he was in the Great Lakes, in the sort of St. Lawrence River sort of east of Toronto, east of Lake Ontario, that region. He was based at Picton, and he, interestingly, I found this incredible image that somebody had drawn it's a snakes and ladders portrayal of your journey through flight training. And obviously you have successes and failures, and it's all depicted in this sort of snakes and ladders format. So given that I've got a background in aviation, it tickled me, this particular drawing, and I thought I should incorporate it.
Thank you.
Anyway, these are pictures in Canada, and he's doing his training with his sextant, doing fixes and what have you. So they obviously trained, did the basic training. And interestingly, I found out much later that they were extremely well trained, the navigators. And the Germans, interestingly, relied very heavily on technology, and they hadn't really been trained in the basics. So when the equipment failed, they were really lost. But the RAF trained their navigators very thoroughly. And of course, at this stage of the war, as you alluded to at the start, they really were relying very much on basic navigation. This was sort of before the advances in technology were only just sort of starting to come on stream at this time.
Yeah, I always find that kind of, I mean, your father's not joining at the middle of the war, but kind of is not the very beginning. Those like the volunteer pilots before the war, they're naive. I mean that very non-nastily. They don't know what the war is going to bring. And the guys who kind of enlist or get conscripted by kind of 43, 44, they know that the sort of tide is turning. It's the guys who in 1940, it's like the writing is on the wall. The war is not going very well. And I think those guys, kind of the ones that they're going into it and with absolute knowledge that this is not going to be a picnic,
No, I think that letter that my dad wrote, there was that realization there with his home city being bombed. This is serious business.
It's real.
Yeah. So yes, this it's great. Cable and wireless telegram sent from Canada back to Coventry, and received letter of 16th, huge pieces censored, and this was in May 41. So he spent about 6 months in Canada, and it says huge pieces censored. No chance being home for birthday. Have you received lighter chocolates, foodstuffs sent? Keep smiling, green. So trying to sort of keep the morale up at home. So and obviously been censored as well through the censorship, as you can see with the stamps there. So then he comes back home in sort of July, and continues in training on the Fairey Battle, which he had actually been flying in Canada in Canada anyway, and the Anson, and he was in 3 OTUs, Operation Training Units. And the incredible thing about this story, I've been researching it since 2011. I wish I'd started sooner, to be honest. But anyway, it's a story that keeps giving, because only in the last 2 or 3 weeks has this photo on the bottom right appeared. It appeared on Facebook. Somebody had posted hundreds of photographs. A guy called Andrew. I'm very grateful to him. A picture of my dad at one of the OTUs. I think it's Lichfield. It's 27 OTU, and he's on the back there, on the left. First in from the left with the Tash. So incredible. But obviously the Fairey Battle is an interesting aircraft, because obviously it had been relegated to it obviously been very, very unsuccessful on the front line, and has suffered huge losses. So it'd been relegated to a sort of training role, and it wasn't a great aeroplane. And then the Anson is interesting. I don't know if you know, but it was, I believe it was the RAF's first aircraft with a retractable undercarriage, and it was very problematic. So it took a lot of effort to wind the gear up. So that I think they quite often flew around with the gear down because they couldn't be bothered to wind it up. But so the battle in the Anson, where he continued his training. This is just a depiction of the 23 missions that he flew, which we'll talk about. So I intend just to focus on 3 key ones, and then another notable one as well. And the 2 in red will become significant, or the significance will become apparent in due course. But yeah, a lot of familiar places in the Roar, but also there was still, as you alluded to again, Paul, that my dad was in that period where they were still sort of quite strategic in some of the bombing. They were bombing ports and things like that, or bombing the German Navy in Brest, and other such things. And it was only sort of later on, towards the end of my dad's time operational, that the change of philosophy occurred. So he was posted to 218 Squadron, Gold Coast Squadron at Marham. He arrived there on the 8th of December 41, and then he flew his first mission on the 16th of December 1941 to Ostend, and that was in a Wellington. And of course, the Wellington, as everyone will know, I'm sure, was a real mainstay of the bomber force at this time, and it was much loved by its crew. It's a very rugged aeroplane, thanks to its incredible design, its construction design, the geodetic construction, obviously perfected by Barnes Wallis. Although he didn't design the aeroplane, he designed that geodetic construction. And I think, as you'll see in a minute from an extract from my dad's logbook, he was very grateful for the strength of the airplane.
Yeah, at that point, as you said, Stuart, when the war is, missions aren't always going very well, they're trying to find out how to good things. Having an aircraft that's got a good chance of bringing you back is about all you can rely on at that point.
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see that in a second. He flew in this particular one on the 21st December 1941, and Hotel Alpha was the code letters for 218 Squadron. What I think interesting about this, when you think about just the war efforts, we built 11,500 of these, just Wellingtons, I suppose in a sort of 6-7 year period. By contrast, Boeing has built 11,500 or so 737s over a 40-year period. And when you think, and that's just the Wellingtons, how they managed to turn these things out in huge numbers, quite incredible. So so my dad flew in that very one. This is an extract from his logbook, and thanks to Sean Feast, I don't know if Sean's on the chat, he told me that I hadn't realized that the red meant that it was an operation at night. And if you had a green entry, that was a daytime operation. So my dad did 3 trips to Brest in the space of a week, and 2 of these were quite eventful. And of course they were bombing Brest because the Scharnhorst and the Eisenhower were there, and my dad went down the 7th of January 42 first, and
Stuart, we've lost your audio for a second. Stuart, hang on.
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Whether it's internet or your microphone's come unplugged, but we can't hear you. Well, I can't hear you.
Okay, let me just check. Right, let me just check the internet.
Hang on. Hello.
Can you hear me?
No, I've lost. Something's gone iffy. Oh no, apparently they can hear. Just me, I can't hear you for some reason.
Oh right, okay.
Okay. Apparently it's everything's. I just can't hear you. I don't know why.
Okay, shall I just carry on until you can come back on stream? Or do you want me to just wait for a minute? Do you want to come out and come back in again or something? Or can you hear me now?
Okay.
How's that?
Yeah, I carry on talking. I can't hear you for some reason, but it's just me. Well, the viewers can. So keep talking.
All right. Well, first of these trips to Brest, in brackets, it says well shot up, but no injuries. In very nondescript fashion. And And then a subsequent trip 2 days later, that's, well, no comments in that one. And then the third trip within the same week, landed Exeter, very heavily damaged, wireless operator and front gunner injured. So obviously the crew extremely thankful for the strength and ruggedness of the mighty Wellington on that occasion. This is as most people would know, I think the RAF kept meticulous records, and I managed to consult the corresponding operational record book, and the entry for the third mission to Brest says bombs dropped in the dock area, flak in tents, and searchlights unusually active, landed Exeter owing to injuries to the wireless operation front gunner. So that was the specific record that the RAF used to keep. So they'd interview the crew on the way back, on their return, and ask them for details of their experience. And they'd also keep a sort of more general records of the squadron's activities for that day as well. So there's both extracts there. How you doing, Paul?
Yeah, my sound came back. I don't know what happened there. It's not the cats. The sidebar's thinking it's my cat, but no, they're not here. It's just something went weird.
Yeah,
I'm back. I can hear you.
Excellent. Good. So I was just saying how the Air Force kept meticulous records, and he also, as you'll see from another extract shortly, the language is very much of the era, which is great. And the amazing thing is, when you think of today and the quality, and I think the quality of the writing of the reports is fantastic. Everyone could really, obviously really were able to write very well in those days, which is brilliant. So then the first of the famous raids my dad took part in. So the Channel Dash. Now, I'm going to just not talk at great length about this, but if for those of you really interested in finding out more, Al Murray and James Holland have just done an amazing series. I've just listened to it, and I don't know if they're on, but it's brilliant, about the Channel Dash, which is perhaps not the Navy and the RAF's finest hour. So, as I mentioned, my dad's visits to Brest were to bomb the Eisenhower and the Scharnhorst. They were joined by the Prinz Jürgen, and the Germans wanted to get these battleships back to Kiel, and they formulated a plan to get them back called Operation Cerberus. The British knew that this was going to happen, and we created an equivalent plan called Operation Fuller. However, despite the fact we had a plan, a combination of bad luck, poor communication, some amazing planning on the part of the Germans, and quite an audacity on the part of the Germans, meant that this effectively succeeded. Although the Kriegsmarine never really ventured out after the Channel Dash, so I suppose in a sort of roundabout way, it was successful. There were no more Channel Dashes attempted after that, but nevertheless, on the day, it wasn't great because it was 12 hours before they were actually discovered. And they were sort of all the way up the channel at that stage, so it wasn't great. So this is the route from Brest, and I believe there was a flotilla of destroyers and faster MTB type boats, and also there were, I think it was 280 fighters escorting these three capital ships. And as I say, I think they were almost at Dover before they were discovered, and which is quite incredible when you think about it. But once the Operation Fuller was implemented, somewhat late, Bomber Command did their bit, but this was after the incredible bravery of Esmond. Oh gosh, what's his name? Eugene Esmond, who died flying the six, attacking with the six Swordfish. And my dad actually, they took off and then they had to come back because the front turret of their Wellington failed But they took off again, and in the report that I found, they did actually get down to 300 feet and drop their bombs. So the other thing about this is the weather. The Germans waited until the weather was particularly poor, and also they did it at daytime, and we were expecting them to take a different route all the way around the west coast of Ireland and down the North Sea, and secondly, we weren't expecting them to do it in bad weather. So it must have been pretty hazardous flying low level in bad weather, regardless of whether you've been shot at. So yeah. Anyway, so but this is the entry in my dad's logbook, and it mentions the Scharnhorst and the Eisenhower. This is significant because that was my father's last mission on the Wellington, his 7th mission. That was a Wellington. 218 Squadron was in the process of converting to the mighty Stirling at that stage, and my dad's best friend, a fellow navigator, was in a Stirling, and this is his Stirling on that day was attacked by a couple of ME-110s, and they claim to have shot one of them down, but this is the actual combat report of my dad's best friend, Philip Gales. There's more about Philip later on in the story, but yeah, this was the actual report, and they claim to have seen this 110 shot down. I don't think they actually did in the end, but still, it's interesting bit of memorabilia.
Yeah.
Yeah, so my dad converts to the mighty Stirling, the RAF's first 4-engine bomber. Of course, again, you know, when we think about bomber command, we naturally think about the Lancaster. But of course, as I said, the Wellington was the mainstay at this stage, and the mighty Stirling was with the RAF's first 4-engine bomber, and it's largely overlooked. Hell of a beast, quite a lot bigger than the Lancaster. Whilst much maligned for its performance, it was actually much loved by its crews because it was very palatial inside. It was a very spacious, very over-engineered aeroplane. It was almost like hand-built. And Short Brothers, who made them, their story is really interesting. They were a very philanthropic business, apparently, and they were the first company to go into full-scale aircraft production globally, anywhere. So lots of incredible heritage there. We only built 2,300 or so of these, compared with nearly 7,500 Lancasters. There's a clip there, but I can't play it. But we're going to share the link of some Pathy news of the Stirling. It's brilliant, and the language is fantastic. This is a diagram that just shows the relative dimensions of the Stirling in comparison with the Lancaster, and you can see the Lancaster's in blue and the Stirling's in yellow, so it's quite a bit bigger. It had issues in that it couldn't fly as high as the others, so it was meant to be more susceptible to flak. But apparently, because of its relatively narrow wingspan, it was incredibly maneuverable. And I've read some accounts of people who flew them, and it said that it was said that it could in skilled hands, it could outturn every British fighter apart from the Hurricane. It was amazing. Once you got it in the air, it had a terrible tendency to swing on takeoff as well. Yeah, which was not great. But the other thing, it's whilst perhaps they were shot down in higher numbers because they were lower, actually one's ability to get out was much greater because of the space. Whereas the Lancaster had that big wing spar in it, and I think it was much easier. And that is reflected in the actual record, in the actual figures for. I think the survival rate was about 26% out of a Stirling compared with the Lancaster.
And you made the good point that it's not that it's a bad aircraft. It was a little bit more difficult to produce. The Lancaster was more set up for production lines. So when an aircraft kind of disappears, there's a tendency to think, well, it wasn't very good. Well, it was all right. There was a better, more streamlined alternative in terms of production, because that's the thing the British are facing the most. Is it's not so much how good it is, it's how quickly can we get them out of the factories to the front line, hence the Sten gun and things like that. But
absolutely.
Stirling, my cousin who was shot down over Germany started on Stirling, so I've got a bit of a soft spot for them.
Yeah, actually, there's a very famous pilot, Brian Shrubshaw, the Concorde test pilot. He apparently flew Stirlings. So there you go. Anyway,
Good.
is just some pictures inside. It was, it was a real gentleman's flight deck, and it had dual controls as well, which was very unusual as well, compared with the other later models, later aircraft type. The navigator station's on top left there, and then the engineer station down below. This now the second famous raid. Now, interestingly, thanks to the squadron historian Steve Smith, who's been extremely helpful in my search for and research for my dad's story. He told me a number of years ago that, did you know that your dad was involved in a secret mission? So I obviously researched that, and it seems that the in early 42, the Russian High Commission in exile was very upset that the Skoda factory was making tanks for the German army, which were being used on the Eastern Front. So they approached the Czech government in exile, headed by Beneš, and said, "What can you do about this?" So they that can you do something about it? So they then approached the RAF, and they came up with this plan called Operation Cannonbury to bomb the Skoda factory. And they were supposed to use, it was supposed to be the first use of this technology called Rebecca Eureka. Rebecca was the airborne receiver, and Eureka was the ground transmitter. And this meant to be used by ground-based Czech resistance who'd been trained in the UK and then parachuted back into Czechoslovakia. It seems that German intelligence was good, and they actually discovered they captured the transmitter. So there was going to be, I believe, they were going to cancel the operation, but they decided no, to go ahead with it. And they lit fires around the Skoda factory. There was just six Stirlings involved. It was my dad's longest mission, 8.5 hours there and back, flogging all the way to Czechoslovakia and back. And my dad, they dropped the bombs quite low level. My dad dropped the bombs at 2,000 feet. I think another one of the Stirlings dropped them even lower. One of them was lost on the way back. And what's really interesting about this story is that some of those Czech resistance guys that were involved went on to assassinate Reinhard Heydrich, all part of Operation Anthropoid. And this incredible story. And my father's from the Midlands, and he's buried in near Leamington Spa, in a village in Leamington Spa. And Leamington, I only discovered in 2022, the 80th anniversary of this, that Leamington Spa was the headquarters of the Czech army in exile.
Yep.
And there is a memorial in Jepson Gardens in Leamington to the 7 Czech paratroopers who were involved in, obviously, assassinating Reinhard Heydrich. And at least 2 of those, Jan Kubis and Gabček, were involved apparently in supporting my dad's mission. So I never knew that there was a connection with that memorial. So I was in the Czech embassy, got to hear about it. And although there's been a number of films about the story, there's only one that features the Skoda bombing raid, and that's a Czech language film called Attentat. And I got invited to the Czech embassy around the 80th anniversary to see it in the basement cinema there. And it's got a 5-minute extract of this depiction of the bombing of the Skoda factory. So it's a great honor to do that. So that is the story of that particular raid. One of the Stirlings was lost on the way back. It was actually, the raid was also commanded by a very famous Kiwi pilot, whose name escapes me, but he went on to be involved with the leading POWs at a concentration camp. Oh gosh, it'll come back.
Lammonson?
Lammonson, yes, he was he commanded that mission.
I got an RAF question right. It's my weakest subject. That's it.
Yeah,
that's
Lammonson, thank you. Yes, thank you. Didn't you have him on the program?
I had a biographer of him.
Yeah.
In New Zealand.
Yeah, he was an incredible person, you know, a real leader of men, an absolutely superb pilot as well. He led this mission. Anyway, so the extract of my dad's logbook here, 8 hours 34, Operation Skoda, Pilsen. You can see there Hamburg. In the midst of all this, some rather sporty training as well. A cross-country formation flight at 150 feet. Navigation exercise involving multiple Stirlings. That's quite sporty, I think, at 150 feet. Anyway, then a gardening operation, which of course code name for dropping mines, and that was at the Langlands Belt, which some of the listeners might know is between Denmark and Germany, and we dropped mines there to stop Kiel being used, well, hopefully being used. And then there's another raid which says Ops Leon, and it's 2 tons of nickels. Nickels was the code name for leaflet dropping, and this was quite a significant day out for my dad, because although it was meant to be relatively easier mission going to drop leaflets, a rather unfortunate thing happened on the way back. They'd completed the leaflet dropping. They dropped 654,000 leaflets from the UK and US governments, all in French, and I think it was over Vichy France, and it was aimed at bolstering the French morale. And on the way back, they were intercepted by this new night fighting operation called Turban Light, and this consisted of 2 airplanes, a night fighting Hurricane, and a Boston, well, American Boston, but we called it the Havoc, which was quite appropriate for this particular night. And the Havocs had been modified. The Havoc had been modified with a big searchlight on the front, which is very heavy, and that was the Turban Light. And they had some basic radar kit in, and the idea was that the Havoc would identify targets for the Hurricane to shoot down, and they'd direct them onto the target. Anyway, they misidentified my dad's Stirling, which was Romeo 9313, and they intercepted it and shot it down. It seems that the subsequent border inquiry, they didn't use the searchlight, apparently, for whatever reason. The Havoc, I think Squadron Leader Bud was one of the pilots, and interesting, this wasn't particularly career limiting for him, because he went on to have a very illustrious long career in the Royal Air Force. The fact that he shot down one of his air airplanes didn't seem to hinder his progress up the ladder. So the Havoc and the Hurricane were based at Hangmere, and the operations record for them, it was their 3455 flight. It says in it that they shot down a Stirling. This is like a drawing that I found that's a depiction of what was supposed to happen, but apparently on this particular night it didn't happen. Anyway, thankfully none of the crew were killed, and I say this happened on the 5th of May 1942. The Stirling came down on the Petworth estate in Sussex. The crew were quite spread out. The captain, Squadron Asher, was the last off the aeroplane, apparently. And it seems that the Germans, the RAF had mistaken the Stirling for a Condor.
Right.
Yeah, which you can understand. The Luftwaffe is only 4-engine aeroplane. So this is again through Steve Smith, the Squadron historian. I got copies of these French leaflets that were dropped, and there was Harry Hughes, I think it is, did a program, War Digs, about digging up Stirling, but strangely they didn't talk anything about the crew. And the guy who was Andy, who I can't remember his surname, he was advising when Andy
Saunders.
Yes, Andy was with the advisor on this.
Oh, that's two I've got right today. Yeah, I'm on a roll.
You know your guests very well, and he when I contacted him, he said, "Oh gosh, well, our researchers have not done a very good job, because if they'd only tracked you down, we could have found out so much more about the crew." Anyway, if anyone wants to find it, it's about the Stirling, but no mention of the crew. What's really interesting and quite amusing, For whatever reason, the Stirling crew, once they were rounded up, they were taken back to Tangmere, and apparently there was a real kerfuffle. It says in the records that there was a near riot in the mess when the crews came together, because obviously the Stirling crew weren't very happy about what had happened, but thankfully they all survived. This is the actual police report, which actually I got from Andy, and it mentions at first they thought it was a Wellington, and then actually they said, oh no, it was a Stirling, and it says that they were taken to Tangmere, and the 7th Airman found uninjured, Sergeant Mulroy. Tangmere informed. So it's great. So yeah, brilliant. Anyway, then the third most famous raid my dad was involved in was the first 1,000 bomber raid, and of course at this point Bomber Harris had taken over in February 1942, I think it was, and actually up until that point Air Vice Marshal Baldwin had been in charge of Bomber Command, and that's quite significant to this story, as you'll see in a minute. Anyway, the first 1,000 bomber raid, as people know, I think we wanted to make a statement, and Bomber Harris was just implementing a directive from above, and he got everything that could fly. I believe that the last minute the Coastal Command pulled out, but on this mission they even had training squadrons on. They got basically everything that could fly. It was 30th of May 1942. Cologne was not the original target. Hamburg was, as people may know, but the weather was bad over Hamburg, so Cologne was the secondary target. And this is a clip which we'll put the link on at some point from a documentary probably maybe 20 years ago about the 1,000 bomber raid, which is quite interesting. And it talks about how the morale, the Germans weren't allowed to talk about it outside the city because they were concerned about the effect on morale. So Air Vice Marshal Baldwin at this stage was second in command of effectively second in command Bomber Command. He was at head of number 3 Group Bomber Command, in which 218 Squadron was, and he decided to go on the raid at the last minute. He thought, right, I'm going to go and have a look at this. He was in a somewhat gung-ho mood because he'd just lost his son 2 weeks before in the army, apparently. So he thought, what the hell, I'm going to go on this. I believe he got into trouble for it, but he was determined to go and see. And actually, he ended up going on my dad's aeroplane, as you'll see in a second. But I thought I'd just include the numbers just to make the point about the Wellington being the mainstay at this stage, because of the 1,047 bombers that took off, or aircraft that took off, 602 were Wellingtons. Yeah, incredible. And only 73 Lancasters, because obviously Lancaster's just coming on stream at this stage. And surprisingly, the losses were actually quite light. Apparently, Air Vice Marshal Baldwin insisted on the crew doing an extra circuit, and I don't think they were overly happy about that. They just obviously wanted to get back to Marham. But the Daily Mirror, in true tabloid fashion, got sensationalized it and got the figures wrong. But this is the actual Daily Mirror, and that's Johnny Baldwin there in that picture. This is the ops board from Marham, and I don't think people can see, but in about towards the bottom it says Air Vice Marshal Baldwin went on Whiskey 7530. Normally, my dad flew his squadron leader Ashworth. On this occasion, the squadron, the boss of the squadron decided to go. I think he decided, I better go because I better take this flight because my boss is coming. So quite interesting. But the language is great because it says so much importance was placed on this effort that Air Vice Marshal Baldwin, with a whole load of titles after his name, flew on Q Queenie, captained by Wing Commander Holder, who was the squadron commander.
And it's interesting that your father was part of, because this is all, it's a war, it's a mission to help win the war, but it's also a political statement. It's also this,
absolutely,
trying to reinforce this idea that the bomber will get through, going back to the 1930s, that strategic bombing will bring the war to an end. And it's people are kind of committing to it, as you said, without necessarily believing it's going to work. It's the fact that we've got to make this statement of that, this sort of large-scale bombing force will get there, and within a few months, it does start becoming very, very effective. But this is it's a statement of intent as well as being a mission, isn't it?
And I think to impress the Americans as well. And interestingly, you know, in the podcast, sorry to plug another podcast, but Al Murray and James, a brilliant one on the channel dash, they're talking about there've been lots of failures at that stage, but you know, all of the tide was starting to turn, and I think this was obviously a big statement, as you say.
It's a statement. It's a statement of intent. It's and it's a message also to the other, as you say, it's a message to the USA. It's a message to the message to the Soviets. It's a message to the public. You know, we're starting to do something. Yeah, it's good stuff.
The logistics involved in doing this it just beggars belief, doesn't it? Anyway, this is the logbook entry, and it says top there, Ops Cologne. Took Air Vice Marshal Baldwin. Interestingly, they wanted to do the second. They wanted to do another. They were planning to do a series of them, Operation Millennium, which was called Operation Millennium, and they were planning to do another raid on Hamburg. I think it was the next day, but actually, Bomber House was dissuaded because the crews were knackered, and they put it off for another day. And then they did Essen on the 1st of June. That was the second 1,000 bomber raid. And then my dad did a trip to Bremen, then to Emden. This time took Group Captain McKee. I don't know. So he seemed to be taking high-ranking officers on his trips. And then we've got the 19th of June 42, which is an air test. Now, this is quite significant because it's the last entry in my dad's logbook. Before obviously he came unstuck using language of the time. So this is significant because it seems that there was an RAF photographer visiting the base at the time, and he took a load of promotional pictures. And would you believe this was the Imperial War Museum directed me towards this on their database, and this is our Whiskey 7530. We think on that day, 19th of June, and incredibly, and first of all, the quality is fantastic.
Yes,
but my dad's on that aeroplane, we believe, which is quite incredible.
Just want to say, pay you your due respects for, as you said, you have been researching this story for nearly a couple of decades, but you're like a schoolboy with the excitement of the fact that you're still getting photos and you're still getting archives. It's fantastic. I mean, I don't want to patronize you, but it's fantastic to see. There are people I know in history who have been teaching history for 30 years who may be a little bit fed up with saying the same stories in front of other classroom, but your enthusiasm for this is really fantastic. And I can only imagine your excitement when you first saw that in such high quality. My dad's in that. My dad's in that.
I know, it's incredible. I mean, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Yes, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. And I say, this is a story that just keeps giving, because I've just new photograph just turned up recently. There's another one I'll show you shortly. Anyway, that's another picture of it. And this is the crew taken on that day. We think, and my dad's on the left, far left. Squadron Ashworth, the captain. Now, this was interesting as well. My dad flew with this gentleman 33 times on ops and on missions, on training, and he was 40. He was an old guy, and he'd been a celebrated pilot before the war, but he managed to sort of blag his way back into the Air Force. So, really, really old at the time. And incredibly, a couple of days after this photo was taken, 3 of these men were dead, which is quite chilling to think. The other interesting thing, that Aeroplane magazine featured the photograph in an advert for Short Brothers in December 42. And I contacted them around the anniversary and said, you might like to know about the crew of that aircraft, and they printed it in a little piece in the Aeroplane, which is quite nice.
Fantastic.
Anyway, so this last mission, 20th of June 42, only 287 aircraft to Emden. My dad had been there a couple of times before, so you'd think it was relatively straightforward. But on the way back, they were intercepted by a German night fighter, and rather chillingly, in the operation records book there, it says Nothing was heard of this aircraft since takeoff. Yeah, it's really brutal language, isn't it? So they were shot down on the way back, and flying back, and they had a new pilot, second pilot that just joined them, a guy called Des Plunkett, who again is significant. To the
Name
story.
dropping there again. Yeah.
Name dropping, yeah, sorry. So anyway, he just joined the squadron. He'd been converted from the two-engine Manchester. So they were shot down on the way back, and the airplane came down. They were involved in a dogfight, but they unfortunately crashed. Squadron in Ashworth kept that airplane flying long enough for 5 of the crew to get out. Sadly, one of the guys, his parachute failed to open, and his body was found nearby. 2 of them were killed. Squadron in Ashworth was killed at the controls, and the 19-year-old tail gunner was died in the crash. So I was only 19. My dad was just 22. And so the location was just northwest of Horn, a place called Wadway. And this is the sort of the field where it came down. Horn is like a mini Amsterdam, just about an hour north of Amsterdam. Very rural community. My dad, they think, having spoken to witnesses, they think my dad was the last person to bail out of the 5 before it crashed. And he came down in this vicinity. Now, this is interesting. This is where I meant to. There are 3 names that have been mentioned for who shot them down. There's the official record seems to be Johannes Worth. Des Plunkett's subsequent book mentions a guy called Ludwig Becker, and then there's this guy that the local Dutch felt was responsible. I've focused on this guy because he's very interesting. So I don't know, is the honest truth, but he's a very interesting guy. This guy was an Austrian prince. He shot down over 50 bombers. He wasn't a Nazi, and his nickname was Prince of Darkness. And his best mate was another Austrian prince who was in the Luftwaffe, and they were known as the Princes of Darkness. He eventually died in a very bizarre aircraft accident, and he'd been involved in a plot, one of the plots to assassinate Hitler, interestingly. And the other thing to say is that there's another picture of him there, and they were based at Leeuwarden up in the north of Holland. The interesting thing is, whoever it was who shot my dad down, they did establish contact with my dad. I don't know whether it was by telephone or after my dad was captured. My dad had a couple of days on the run hiding, and then was captured. They established contact to say, "Look, are you okay? I was doing my bit. I hope you understand." And which I think is incredible. There was a chivalric code, which you don't necessarily expect. This is some pictures of the wreckage of the Stirling in a field, with the German soldiers on it, very grim. So having been hiding for a couple of days, helped by Dutch farmers who put him on trying to get him on a tram to meet resistance, he was captured at a place called Purmerend, between Horn and Amsterdam. He was actually betrayed for cash, but not by the farmers, I discovered, but that's a whole other story. He was sent to Dulag Luft at Frankfurt, which was like a clearing station for POWs, and interrogated there. And this is the sort of arrest card, pilot officer green German arrest card, which I've got.
Is there any bit of paperwork to do with your dad's story you don't have and are not showing us?
I'm trying to think of copies. There's another guy called Mike Vidal who's very active in researching the story of the Great Escape, and he been very helpful. And
I'm assuming your father really hasn't benefited from any real escape and evasion training. That's later on, isn't it? When they've started, when the British and Americans start getting pilots and crews back from places, then they start having little parts of them, the Nissen Hut saying, "Oh, this is what." He's just like, well, hope for your best and just kind of wing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So anyway, this is his first letter written back to my grandparents in Coventry. He was missing in action until receipt of this letter, and that's an extract from the local paper, Pilot Officer Will Alleman in Green. mentions the school and the fact that we had the pharmacies in Cov. But he writes this letter back to his parents, and honestly, it's a masterclass of understatement. And having seen other letters written in similar circumstances, I reckon they must have been instructed to write such letters to try and keep morale up. Because he says, just a line to let you know that they have not killed me yet. I cannot, of course, tell you anything of that which occasioned my holiday here. I'm quite well and uninjured. The food is reasonably good, thanks to the Red Cross, and I'm doing my best to keep myself fit and free from boredom. I sincerely hope you did as I requested as soon as you heard I was missing, and went and collected my belongings from X. The night before I came unstuck, we had a wonderful party at X, and I took along the girl whom I mentioned on my leave. Her address is... Anyway, he then goes on to say, because we had a perfume counter on our pharmacy to send some perfume to this lady. And it's brilliant. And I've got a lot of his letters, and I've written them all up, and it's... You glean quite a lot of insight from these letters, actually, how they were feeling.
That's brilliant psychology on your dad's part, because his family are going to be worried about it, even when they get the letter, they're worried, but giving them something to do, going and getting perfume to send to this random bird I met, is kind of distracting them. It's just taking them out of just bringing it down to mundane thing of like, by the way, can you send me some cornflakes?
Absolutely.
The mundanity of it is so revealing of incredible. What's going on?
Amazing. So he was sent from Dulag Luft, of course, to Stalag Luft 3, this new camp. Had only been built 2 or 3 months before, and of course I've got the clip from The Great Escape there, but obviously we can't show up. Everyone knows it. Famous for The Great Escape. This is my dad's POW card. Now, another friend of mine who lives near me, Roger Morehouse, he told me that on my dad's POW card, my dad doesn't give the maiden name of my grandmother. He says verweigd, which means refuse to give it. And Roger told me that that was quite a ballsy thing to do, not to reveal information. So I don't know why my dad did it, whether there was some sort of Jewish heritage in our family or whatever, I don't know. But this is the prisoner of war card. And he was in the East Compound, which was the original compound and of course, as it got bigger, they then built the North Compound. The Germans, as you know, were very well organised when it came to POWs. And if you were an airman, you went into a camp run by the Luftwaffe. And this was the famous Friedrich von Lindiner, who was a really good guy by all accounts. There was mutual respect, I think, between him and the POWs. And of course, it was under his watch that, of course, the Great Escape occurred. But he was horrified by what had happened. So just it was a new style camp, not meant to be escape proof because of its location, the nature of the sand, etc., soil, etc., etc. This is just from, I don't know, been to the museum, Paul, but this is the mock-up of the, you've probably seen this in the museum of the mock-up of the North Compound. This is actually the photo at the bottom is the shows the layout, and the East Compound is at the bottom right there. My dad was in Hut 68 of the East Compound. We think this photograph is potentially a picture of the East Compound, actually, so it could be one of these huts that my dad was in. Amazingly, you can see it was a very sort of unforgiving, barren place, as you can see. So I think Hut 68, room 4 of the East Compound. The obviously they look forward to their Red Cross parcels. I gather the Canadian ones were particularly good.
That's why the Canadian ones were the best. Canada, then Australia. The British ones were the ones that were a bit manky. As things don't change. I can't say it in French, but I was anyway, interestingly, the Klim, the brand name of the milk, of course, milk spelt backwards, and of course, these pictures are wildly now, wonder what they were growing to help smooth the way, to help ease the burden. But of course, and this, when you first of all, you think these guys had all been through hell, bailed out, crash landed, seen horrific sights.
very stressed. Yet they were the cream of society. These Air Force guys, they'd all been like grammar school boys, and they're well educated, and they're very resourceful, and they put all sorts of things on. And I believe actually, well, I'll talk about him in a minute, but I think he's on. But I'll say Peter Butterworth's son, I think, is on the chat. I hope he is. But they did all these amazing things. They had a golf club, and they only had one club apparently, and they called the greens. I'm not a golfer, but they called the greens browns. And of course, my dad actually, and I won't show it to you, but so my dad had some of his pharmacy books sent out, and only recently I looked at one, and it got geprüft in it, because it had been approved, so he'd actually had it sent and then approved. So sports day there, they had international rugby internationals, football internationals. They kept themselves busy. However, there was a dark side. I don't want to give the impression that it was all jolly sort of public school. It wasn't, and I think there was a dark side. And my dad talks in this letter about the losing a lot of weight through dysentery, and he's looking forward to taking a long holiday home, a long touring holiday when he gets home. But what is really telling here, he says, what to me is the most obnoxious is the waste of valuable time. Life is short enough without spending years in such places as these. However, I'm exceedingly lucky to be able to look forward to after the war, in inverted commas. So I think he recognized that he was extremely lucky to have survived 2 bailouts. Incredible, really. I mentioned before his best friend, Philip Gales, Pip. He hears in September, 23rd of September 42, he hears Pip's posted missing. My dad hears this, and he talks very endearingly about his friend, and he says, I heard about him being missing. He and I were the very best of friends and have gone through thick and thin together. We were even taking out 2 sisters when back on the base, and he was one of the finest of chaps. Pip Gales Stirling has never been found. He's still missing. Yeah, he's one of the 20,000 on the Runnymede Memorial, and I have visited that. So quite chilling, isn't it? Anyway, we'll crack on. So as Stalag 3 was being expanded, there was overcrowding. So some 700 or 800 prisoners were actually moved to another camp at Shubin, near a place called Bigosh. And I actually visited this place for the first time in 2024. So my dad was sent there for a few months, and there was a big escape then, and up until that point it was the biggest escape. 31 got out, 33 out, 31 recaptured, 2 drowned. And apparently I heard that they were sent there because if people had a reputation for escaping, but I don't know that for a fact. But here's where the most amazing thing: the photo on the bottom left, the 2 pictures of my dad as a POW at Shubin. The bottom left one just came up in the last 2 or 3 weeks when there was a documentary on iPlayer at the moment, a Welsh language documentary about a guy shot down, Fleet Air pilot, ended up in Shubin, and he kept this extensive POW log, and he had these photographs. Picture of my dad there, incredible. Wow. The top one, my dad's on, and a family member had it and hadn't realised its significance, and I got that only a few months ago, 3 months ago.
And what was your father's attitude? Because we've got a series coming up on World War II TV in June, in fact, about the POW experience, trying to not concentrate on the escaping thing, but talk about the daily grind. Because some people kind of saw it as like well, I'm going to learn stuff. I'm going to do kind of the Open University, come out of this with the language. Others were determined to get out and put a spanner in the works for the Germans. Others were like just hating it. And what was your father's attitude?
Well, sadly, because I was young, I said my dad died 50 years ago this year, and I was 12. I didn't really get a chance to talk to him, which is the sad thing. I found out so much, but I realized there's so much I'm never going to find out. But I sense he was the one who one of the ones who wanted to just get his head down, and he realized how lucky he'd been already. Why put himself at risk anymore? And as I say, he did receive 2 books. He's got Chaucer's works with a geprüft stamp, and he's also got a pharmacy book, also similarly stamped. So I think he decided to keep his head down and and just see it through.
Which, to be honest, we don't get going down a massive rabbit hole, but it was Guy Walters did some of the work with certain few, this whole idea that it was your duty to escape, but it wasn't. It was never. The first thing the only thing Guy could find is that as an officer in British services, you are obliged to try and resist capture. So if you land, you're not supposed to crash. You're not supposed to just walk straight up to the German town hall and give yourself up. But once you've been captured, there is no obligation. There may have been some kind of social obligation to your peers, but there is this idea it's a British officer's duty to try. It wasn't. It never was, folks. If you think it was, you are mistaken. It was you done your duty. You can just stay there and wait for the war to end. That's it. So and as you were making the point, it's a miserable life. There's never enough to eat. It's cold in the winters. It's just surviving is tough enough, as we will get to later on in the story.
Yeah. So anyway, as you say, I think my dad, obviously when he'd been shot down, he hid for a bit and did his best to evade capture and was contacted by some Dutch farmers, but it wasn't them who betrayed him. But that's another story, which maybe we do the POW thing I can reveal, because that's a really interesting story in itself. Yeah. Anyway, this thanks to Ben van Drockenbrink, who runs the Stalag Luft 3 Facebook page. He has produced a couple of books. He let me have this in the slides, so you could get a sense of where these camps were. So Stalag Luft 3 in Germany, because it's now modern day Poland. And Schubin, you can see, is sort of northeast of Stalag Luft 3. So my dad spent a few months there, but then came back to Stalag Luft 3 after that. Of course, we talk about the Great Escape, but of course there was also the wooden horse. And in fact, this is interesting because the bottom right photograph shows my dad's, and this was from the camp curator Marek. The bottom right photograph, 68 is my dad's hut. The red circle is where the wooden horse took place. That was the location of the wooden horse. And as we talked about at the start, amazing story. Eric Williams, he was shot down in a Stirling. That's his rear turret of his Stirling, which is in a museum, a lovely, amazing museum near Schiphol Airport. Right. And well worth a visit. And in there, there's actually, there are lots of really interesting things in there. Anyway, there was a subsequent film made of the wooden horse, and Peter Butterworth, who was one of the very famous camp POWs, who was involved in all the theatrics, and then of course went on to a great career and the Carry On films and other things. And I believe his son's on the chat. He apparently auditioned for the role of the film, the wooden horse, but didn't pass the audition because he was deemed to be not heroic.
He didn't look enough like a guy who'd been in a prisoner of war camp, even though he'd been in a prisoner of war camp. And it's not like it was only 6 years later. The wooden horse was 1950. It's a bit bizarre story.
How ludicrous is that? Anyway, so of course, the Great Escape. I won't labour this too much because we all know the story. But the reason why I mentioned the Great Escape is because Des Plunkett, the second pilot shot down with my dad, had a big role. He made all the maps. He was a cartographer, I think, by trade, and he was number 13 out of the tunnel. One of the furthest to get. It was the furthest of the Brits to get. Yeah, he got the furthest of all the Brits. Survived about 2 weeks and then was recaptured. He survived until 2002, and I would have loved to have met Des, having been shot down with my dad, but it wasn't to be. But of course, it was a masterclass in planning, really, and project management. But there was some collusion with the Germans, of course, with bribery and what have you. But incredible what they managed to do. That's a picture of Des, of course. Roger Bushell on the right. As you mentioned, there's different sort of opinions about the Great Escape. Was it a huge act of folly because Roger had not had such a great war, arguably, because he got shot down in the first mission? But I know it's.
I mean, to me, it kind of. it kind of sits in that category with the planning for Operation Mincemeat, the body that washed up in Spain. You can absolutely admire the incredible organization of getting all the stuff built and the clim tins to make the ventilation, all the making up of the escape gear and stuff like that. But did it have necessarily a very major event outcome effect on the outcome of the war? Probably not. Did it end up in the tragic murder of 50 men? Yes, it did. But so you can kind of admire the ingenuity and that kind of just stubbornness of these people wanting to do it. But did it change? Did it really disrupt the German war machine?
But there's no doubt, had Roger Bushell survived, he would have gone on to great things. He was to speak several languages.
That to me is the fact that those guys who got out were some of the creme de la creme of the people in POW. These were inventive people. Tom Kirby Green, all these guys who ended up being murdered. What would they have done after the war? What amazing things would they have invented? Would they have become actors, scientists, politicians? It kind of wiped out this real brilliant group of individuals who had that dynamism and life. But what an extraordinary story.
And I think also the important thing to make, especially in the world that we live in now, it was a multinational effort. There were multiple nationalities involved in it. It wasn't just Brits. Obviously, we were a lot of Brits, but it's real. When you think about the division being sowed globally, this was a group of lads from different countries coming together in a united purpose. Incredible stuff. Obviously the tunnel, amazing engineering feat, really, designed by Wally Floody, the Canadian mining engineer, but who was moved out of the compound 2 weeks before, which he was incensed about, but I think it saved his life. Now, interestingly, of course, that's the 1,400 Climtons used to during the whole project, with 480 of those for the ingenious air conditioning. Of course, of the 76 who made it out of the tunnel, only 3 made it home, and none of those were Brits. And interestingly, my dad's POW log, he's got a POW log, which the POWs were given logs by like a logbook by the Red Cross. And in those things, my dad's got a whole load of name and addresses, and he's got the name and address of Jens Muller. So my dad must have known Jens Muller, who went on to be an airline pilot with SAS and the Scandinavian Airline after the war.
It's come up numerous times in the sidebar that your dad was like the Forrest Gump of the RAF. Every famous person he kind of bumped into at some point during his life. I don't mean Forrest Gump in terms of like mentally impaired. I mean, in family.
No, I understand. No, brilliant. No, I'd never thought of that. Yes. The other thing about their, interestingly, the POW log, and I must do this, so I'll take volunteers to join me. There's a whole list. They used to fantasize about food, and there's a whole list of restaurant recommendations and pub recommendations. And one of these days, I'd like to go to all these pubs, but half of them probably don't exist anymore. But they obviously had these fantasies about food, and they used to make up pretend menus and things. It's really exotic food, but of course they had like black bread and foul Zatz coffee most of the time. Anyway, whilst we're talking about it, got to mention the 50 who died tragically, and I've recently met Roger Churchill, whose dad Dick famously survived, the last surviving Great Escaper, and we actually cycled the Long March route together last year. And Roger is actually there's no memorial to the 50 in the UK, and he's actually trying to he put together a foundation to try and correct that oversight. And rather, in my dad's, I mentioned about POW logs. The first name in my dad's logbook, POW log, it says, and his name, he says, CP Hall, 4 London Road, Halstead, Sevenoaks, and Kent. And in Chillingly, in brackets, it says, shot after escape from the North Compound.
Wow.
So my dad obviously knew Charles Hall as well. So, it's just...
I mean, again, it's another rabbit hole, but your dad died when you were 12, but I wonder how much of the rest of his life your dad thought, what if I'd, been cajoled into this? What if I'd been one of those diggers? And that he'd survived some pretty perilous missions. He'd been there, and who knows? You just need that guy to come and join us. Start digging, and then suddenly he's part of the escapers. It's amazing.
I mean, the whole story of Roger's dad Dick and his escape partner Bob Nelson, that is an amazing story as well, about their survival as well, and how they were spared because of their names. Incredible. Coming near the end now, but this is the memorial that is at the camp, as you know, Paul, and this was financed by the camp commandant Landauer, because he was so incensed and mortified by what had happened, and he provided the money for this to be built, where the ashes of the 50 were originally placed. That's the arrest warrant for Emil Schultz, who shot Roger Bushell. And then, of course, now after of course the when the news came through, there was a period of mourning in the camp. There was a period of utter non-cooperation, because they were, and I think Lindau has moved on as well. So I think the whole regime changed as well because of what happened. And then, of course, early 1945, the Germans realized the game was up, and the Russians are advancing rapidly from the east. So I think they had all these thousands of prisoners on the Eastern Front, and they decided that to move, they thought they didn't want them falling into the hands of the Russians. So they thought, we'll move them northwest, very short notice, and they could be useful as a negotiating ploy in a potential settlement with the Americans and the British and the Canadians. There were also the rumors that they were going to be taken to a redoubt somewhere and then maybe shot. There were all sorts of rumors. So it must have been a very scary time, and they literally were given very little notice. And
it's that weird paradoxical thing that the war is coming towards a conclusion, and yet there was never a worse time to be a POW. I mean, the same applies to the Pacific under the Japanese as well, is that these guys just had no idea how they were going to be used by the Germans, in what kind of, as you said there, gesture, political pawns. And, as we know from early 45, air crews shot down. That was when German civilians were sometimes, attacking air crews and things. You'd have thought the earlier part of the war would be the more dangerous time, but weirdly, as the war's getting towards the conclusion, that's the real dangerous time to be a POW. And in your dad's case, it's been what, year 3 or year 3.
Yeah, and I think you also bear in mind, there was a whole sort of maelstrom of people just heading west. Thousands of refugees. So it must have been utter chaos. And the 4th marched, and it happened to be the worst winter in Germany for 50 years. And a lot of these guys weren't in great shape, and some didn't make it, and others were accidentally strafed by Allied aircraft. And my dad ended up to another camp, which was vastly overcrowded, in a place called Luckenwald, Stalag. It actually should be Stalag 3 Alpha. It's not Stalag Luft 3 Alpha. That's a mistake there. I haven't corrected it. And this was vastly overcrowded. And anyway, this was one of the menus, and this was provided by a guy called Bill Anderson, Bill is Canadian, and if he's on, I hope he is. But his dad wrote out this menu of what they had: black bread, pea soup, not enough, potatoes, mit skins. I find that kind of amusing. Often rotten, evening snack. It was just horrendous. You can't imagine it.
We had a question about, just can you go back one? Who took that photo on the left? Is that a German photo or
I don't know. I actually don't know. I think it might well be, actually. And the other thing to say about this, and Roger pointed this out to me when we were doing the research into this, that actually the camp guards were involved in this march, and actually these guards weren't really Nazis. They were like sort of home guard, and
they were First World War veterans, and
they weren't in great shape either.
The POWs carried their rifles for them and things like that at times. It's crazy, isn't it? The bond of adversity now, because these guys don't know what's going to happen in Germany either. And I've read that from British prisoners, American prisoners. It's weird what facing peril will do to
Yeah.
people who are enemies.
Yeah.
The camaraderie on that march was extraordinary.
Yeah, absolutely. Incredible story. So they made their way up. This is the sort of route that they followed, not a sort of straight line. The red was marching, so they marched about 125 kilometers. Have to bear in mind that there were loads of other marches going on as well, of other prisoners, of army POWs. Actually, the distance my dad marched was actually relatively short compared with what some of the others, but nevertheless it was pretty horrendous, I think. And they slept in barns, they slept in churches, they slept rough, lived off the land as best they could. And then they were taken to a place called Spremberg, and here they were put onto cattle trucks, standing room only, and these were slow moving. And I think they fancied their chances being on foot more than being on these cattle trucks, because obviously they were potential target for Allied aircraft. And the picture on the top left is the barns at Lipna, where several thousand slept with the cattle, because it was warmer to sleep with the cattle. And apparently it's minus 25 outside. I mean, I've been there, and there's a lovely Polish couple. Both of his grandfathers flew in the Air Force, who bought it, and they're restoring it, and they want people to visit. And then my father went through a place called Bad Muskau, which is now right on the German-Polish border, and they stayed in some stables there. That's the stables on the right. And then this is what's left of the camp at Luckenwald, southwest of Berlin. Now, the interesting thing is, so having left the camp on the 28th of January, they arrived in Luckenwald on the 5th of Feb, after 9 days of marching and in these terrible cattle trucks. Then on the 22nd of April, they were liberated, inverted commas, by the Russian army. And apparently when the Russians came, the Germans all fled, leaving one young prisoner, one young guard, and he was obviously terrified. And again, in true sort of camaraderie and British spirit, they made him a cup of tea and sort of calmed him down. Russians came, and there was a feeling of euphoria at first, but then it all turned very nasty, because the Russians actually held on to these prisoners and wouldn't release them until the British had actually handed over all the Cossack prisoners that had been held, thousands of Cossack prisoners. And of course, the Cossacks had all fought for the Germans, and they naturally, despite the terms of the Yalta Agreement, didn't want to go back to Russia because they were going to face certain death. But in the end, I think Winston Churchill's hands were tied, and they were handed over. And eventually my dad made it home. 12th of May handed over to the Americans, and then 21st of May leaves the camp and up for R&R up in Brussels. And then of course Operation Exodus started, when all the repatriation of all these thousands of prisoners and all the Bomber Command aircraft soon now became transports. And the tragic thing about this is that quite a few of those airplanes crashed, with POWs on board. Just think, yeah.
There's a Commonwealth cemetery down in Rennes in Brittany that has a crashed transport aircraft. It's not POWs, but there's, I think if I remember correctly, there's 6 couples. So these are men in the RAF and Army who married like WAFs and ATS girls. And they were being taken back to England. I think it was August 45, and it bloody it hits bad weather and turbulence and stuff, and it crash lands in Rennes. Yeah, it's the tragedy of 6 newly married couples dying in an accident afterwards is just awful. I think that's all death is awful, but there's something just particularly tragic about that. God, why? Yeah,
I think that just brings to mind. Although technology advanced, still when you think about modern aircraft now, that transport aircraft, their capabilities, it's just bad enough facing the weather, let alone facing enemy fire. It's just incredible what they did. Anyway, they returned to 350,000, and my dad was interviewed by MI9 at Cosford, and of course MI9 was set up by Erin Neve, having he escaped out Colditz, and then had loads of valuable information about the escapes, of which you mentioned. It was all fed back. And my dad finally came home 25th of May, 45, and meanwhile his brother was still at war in the Far East. And my dad was apparently nearly 8 stone. You know, he'd lost a lot of weight. My dad actually subsequently never could really, his stomach was really easily upset, you know. So I think his diet messed up, you know, and he never talked about it. A friend who was a GP once said, "Oh, I think," tried to take him down the pub once, so I think you need to talk about all this stuff. But, you know, they didn't.
They didn't,
so,
yeah.
Anyway, just now, you know, bring it to an end, but this is the memorial on the site of where the bomber crashed, and that's Squadron Leader Ashworth, who was the pilot, and these 3 gentlemen are buried in Bergen, a place called Bergen on the coast of northwest on the western coast of Holland, and there's 250 RAF crew in that cemetery, beautifully kept, obviously, by the Commonwealth War Graves. Ashworth's the oldest casualty in there, and Billy Whitehead was the one who was just 22. His parachute failed to open. They found his body nearby, and then William Watt was a 19-year-old from Aberdeen. Tragically, he had a younger brother who died in a bizarre training accident in Bomber Command 2 years later in bombing at the Cannock Ranch in a Wellington. It's just tragic. So anyway, the point of the talk is obviously to remember the thousands that didn't make it back, and also to remember the several thousand that didn't make it on the Long March as well. So that's really that's the last slide. I mean, I've got a load of stuff about the actual research, but I think I've been going on long enough now, so we probably should.
Well, there are requests to bring you back, because I think this has been your process has been a really good example of how you start with a small story and then build it into a big story, because I think it'd be definitely worth interviewing you as part of my How to Be a Historian series, just about how the hell, because there are a lot of people watching. Darren Little, I'm thinking about you, who are doing their work on their family people who are, you know, because you get dead ends, you get moments where you wonder how you're going to solve that bit, and then you get that flurry of things that come in, and you meet someone else who gives you a contact. And I think it's a really good opportunity to kind of explain it, because I'm doing a series about how to put research together. So I've got Bomber Command historians coming on to talk about how to research RAF service records. I've got someone else coming on talking about how to process archives in American archives. So someone like yourself saying, okay, you want to start with the family history, here's how I did it, understanding that not every person's story is the same, because it's extraordinary, and it's never been a better time with the information that's available online and the contacts you can make. You know, the amount of times I've had guests in the last few weeks and months saying, "Oh, from a Facebook group, I met this thing there," and a guy just shoved up a photo I'd never seen before, because we're finding that it's a cliche, but it's the grandchildren of the veterans generation who are the ones who are automatically scanning documents and putting them into PDFs. It's the sons and daughters often were like, well, Dad had a photo album upstairs. We never really looked at it. But it's the next generation who are just I'll just take photos of everything, and I will put it online and ask someone else, do you know where this is? And I think that would be a good one. So, yeah, and Andreas, I could do a show about how to use the German archives. I might ask Niels for that.
Yeah,
so
Stuart,
you've done your dad proud, and you know what a war he had. People did ask just about a little bit to sort of sum up, you know, marriage and what he did after war. I mean, say he didn't live much longer, but just give us a little summary about your dad's post-war career.
He completed his training as a pharmacist, and worked in our family business, which grew with a number of shops and a couple of camera shops in and around Coventry. He ended up bizarrely. Something you mentioned. What I've discovered is there are so many connections. These stories are all interconnected, which is scary. My dad actually met a lady from Canada after the war, even though not when he was there for his training, but my mother, who was 10 years young, I'm still alive, she's 10 years younger, was 10 years younger than my dad. She came to the UK in 1950 to visit an aunt and uncle in Coventry, and my great uncle had fought in the Royal Flying Corps as a Canadian, and he'd met a lady from Coventry. My mum came over, she'd been a Bell telephone operator in Windsor, Ontario, and then stayed and met my dad. I've got an older brother, and yeah, he worked in the business, and then sadly he had a heart attack when he was 50, and then he had another one on his birthday, 56th birthday, and that was unfortunately fatal. So, yeah, and his other brother survived the war. I'd like to research my uncle's story, actually, the Chindits as well, because that's another incredible story. So,
well, you've got time. You've got time. There's plenty of time. You can do the whole family. Give it another couple of decades.
Yes, I think some of my family think I'm obsessed. I'm passionate. I'm somewhere in the middle, probably. But one thing I would say, I'd like to, obviously like to help anybody, but I've been helped by so many other people that are further down the track than me, and they've been extremely helpful. They're too numerous to name, but they all know who they are. So it's been brilliant. So thank you for the opportunity to share the story, and I hope it doesn't.
No, well, thank you for being here. So folks, I've got a couple of days off to do some other stuff, and then on Friday Molly is joining us to talk about the first of a couple of presentations about the American WACs, so the women in World War II from the US point of view. So folks, as always, click like and subscribe, consider becoming a patron or channel member, buy my guest books, read their blogs, go to their websites, look at their research work, and spread the word, because it's all important history. So Stuart, absolutely delightful. I wish I'm kicking myself I hadn't invited you to do this a few years ago, but then again, we wouldn't have had the latest research work. So, we've got a better show because of it.
Everything.
I will see you all on Friday. Cheers, everybody. Thank you, Stuart. Thank you, viewers. Bye.